you for the introduction. I indeed am coming to Torun for 10 years already, and I should apologize that the knowledge of my Polish is very limited, and so thank you for allowing me to speak in English. Now, so in the Catholic tradition, the object of hope, we are in the year of hope, the object of hope includes the life of the world to come. Vitam venturi saeculi. That's the expression of the Nicene Creed we recite every Sunday. And the biblical foundation is indeed the passage in Revelations. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, which is again a quotation from Isaiah. For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth. And so at the same time, we find in Scripture also the idea that the world as we know it will disappear. Matthew 5:18 speaks of a passing away of heaven and earth. So how are we to harmonize both statements? A new heaven and a new earth, and a passing away of heaven and earth. Equally important, if the souls of the saints enter immediately into perfect beatitude, that is the vision of God face to face, what is then the purpose of this new heaven and earth? How can something contribute to what is already perfect beatitude, the vision of God face to face? Another question we may ask, the world that God has created is very good, as Genesis teaches us. It's the very place in which God has placed us, and upon which we depend for our life. The visible world also provides us with indications of God's goodness and His providence, Romans 1:20. Will all that disappear in the world to come? Now, as you can see in the outline, if you scroll down a little bit, there are two elements of background that are necessary to, I think, understand Aquinas' position. And the first element has to do with creation. And there, the idea, sometimes a mistaken idea appears, especially in the relationship between creation and evolution. For Aquinas, creatio non est mutatio. So, the change we see in creation is a changing of something that already exists. First, the subject was this. It is affected by an agent, and now it is another way. Whereas creation, Aquinas says, is the production of a thing in its entirety without presupposing anything. So it is the bringing into being, not the change of some state one to state two. So creation is very different from the spatio-temporal changes that we observe here on Earth. Creation also involves conservatio, so conservation, the keeping into existence of creation. And for Aquinas, the conservation and the creation of creatures is the same divine act. Just as that I cause my image in the mirror and that image remains in the mirror are simply caused by my presence, and not by my presence and another action. It's one action, creation, conservation. Now, within this process of creation and conservation, God is in no way part of that creation, according to Aquinas. That's the transcendence of God. Now, a second element of background has to do with annihilation. And we find in several places Aquinas explicitly rejecting the idea that God will turn the entirety of creation into nothing. That's what annihilation means. And he is inspired here by Augustine, where Augustine says in a passage, God is not the cause of tending to nothing. Deus non est causa tendendi in non esse. So, of course, why is that? Aquinas argues that the power and the goodness of God is more manifested in the preservation of things in existence than into turning things into nothing. It is God as the highest good. For God as the highest good, it is more fitting for him to keep everything in existence than to be the cause of the annihilation of things. Okay. Of course, in theory, it's not impossible for God to reduce things to non-being, but it is fitting for a God who is wise and good to keep everything in existence. Okay. Now, that's a bit of the background, I think, necessary to understand what Aquinas is saying about the new heaven and the new earth. And I have compiled a list of the most important texts in the outline, which you can follow. Now, Thomas states clearly that the souls need not await the resurrection for perfect beatitude, that the souls of the saints, separated from their bodies, are in God's presence. That's also dogmatically defined by the church. So we can ask, what then is the function of the body when there will be a resurrection of the body? What is the contribution of the body to beatitude? And there, of course, famously, Aquinas makes a distinction between what is of the essence of a thing. The soul is of the essence, belongs to the essence of man's perfection. On the other hand, Aquinas makes a distinction between, or he makes a distinction between what is of the essence of man's perfection and then what is necessary for its well-being, he calls it bene esse, well-being. So and he says the beauty of the body belongs to man's perfection. Another example he gives of this distinction, where he says something is necessary, so that without it the end cannot be attained. For instance, food is necessary for human life. Second, a thing is said to be necessary if without it the end cannot be attained so fittingly. And he gives a medieval example. A horse is necessary for a journey. It's not an absolute necessity, but it's necessary to make a good and swift and comfortable journey. Thus, for a resurrected saint, the saint's own glorified body belongs in some way to his or her beatitude, not as an essential element of it. Aquinas says something similar about the fellowship of friends in the state of glory. The fellowship of friends is not essential to happiness because the entire fullness of man's perfection is in the seeing of God in the beatific vision. But the fellowship of friends leads to, again, the well-being bene esse of happiness. So again, the distinction between what is necessary, absolutely speaking, and what leads to the well-being of a certain state, the state of the glorified, of the resurrected body. Okay. There is a notable contrast when Aquinas asks whether external goods like food, drink, wealth, or power are necessary for happiness. It says they are in no way necessary. Because we don't need them anymore. They belong to our animal body-like state. And so when perfect happiness occurs in the seeing of God, those things will no longer be necessary. So, yeah. So, but they are fellowship of friends, perfection of one's own body. They are necessary for the well-being of the body, but not necessary in the absolute sense, like food is necessary for our animal body-like life on Earth. Now, you can ask yourself, is this not a seminar on the new heaven and new earth? So he's talking about the resurrection of the body. So now I'm coming to the relation between the risen man and the new heavens and the new earth. And here is the clue, the crux, the center of the entire argument. Thomas holds that all bodily creatures were made for the sake of man. So that's what you can call anthropocentrism. Of course, within a theocentrism, God orders everything. God has providence over everything. But everything that is bodily, that is material, is made for the sake of man. And then there's an important text in the census commentary, distinction 48. I think you more 48 there, yeah. Omnia corporalis propter, yeah, that's the one. So, and where he talks about how the material world serves human being, the maintenance of the physical life, advancing in knowledge of God. That's Romans 1:20. I quoted at the beginning. We can find indications of God within the material world. And so what is the usefulness of the material world? Okay, the sustainment of our body, but also to help find God and praise God within creation. Now, glorified man, he goes on, will in no way need the first service of creation, since his body will be incorruptible, so that there is no need for food or drink in the resurrected state. Men will also not need the second service as regards intellective knowledge. We don't need indications within creation to see God because we have a direct vision of God. But then, and that's the key line of this entire talk, which I've underlined in the English. But the eye of the flesh will not be able to attain this vision of the essence. So you have man in a resurrected state, soul and body. The body is also resurrected. The eye of the flesh will not be able to attain this vision of the essence, and thus that an appropriate solace or comfort may be afforded the body, in this matter of seeing the divinity. It will perceive the divinity in its corporeal effects, especially in the flesh of Christ, next in the bodies of the blessed, and so on, in all other creatures. So that is the central line, and I will come back to it. Now, we can formulate, and not we, but Aquinas also formulates an objection where he says non-sensate, so without senses, will not have merited anything, and therefore they ought not to be renewed. So merit, that's of course happens on the basis of our intellect and will. So why should there be a renewal of material things which cannot merit anything? And the next text, also from distinction 48, quam vis yes, corpora. Even though insensible corporeal things have not merited that glory, properly speaking, man has merited the conferral of that glory on the whole universe, inasmuch as it yields the increase of man's glory. And then he gives an example. As a man merits being clothed with more ornate, more precious garments, though the garment itself nowise merits the adornment. So here, the example of clothing. Clothing is the possession in this life that is most closely identified with humans and is literally closest to the body. The type and appearance of clothing symbolizes the identity of the wearer. So Thomas is saying that the transformed world is like transformed clothing for a glorified human body. For risen persons, the world ought to suit them. It ought to fit them like good clothing does. Now, note that men may merit through Christ the renewal of the world. The effects of their salvation are to extend beyond their persons to the world. The glorification of the world happens in response to the glorification of humanity. So ultimately, the renewal of heaven and earth is in fact a result of the resurrection and the resurrected state of the body, because the world in which man lives on earth is fits like a lock into a key. That's why we can find indications of God during our world, during our life here. So also in the new heaven and the new earth, our body will fit. Our renewed body, resurrected body, will fit into a renewed world. Now, another quote from his Synthesis commentary there below, yes, on the screen. Since corporeal creature is disposed of finally in a manner that is in keeping with man's state, and man himself will not only be delivered from corruption, but also clothed in glory. Again, the image of the clothing, as we have stated. It follows that even the corporeal creature will acquire a certain glory of brightness befitting its capacity. So again, the link between the state of man and the fittingness that the state of the world corresponds to the state of man. Now, how does that work in more in detail? And here we come to a more disputed element, probably where Aquinas is too dependent on the knowledge of cosmology of the time, where he says the next quote: "A human being's body is composed of the elements, so water, fire, earth, air. Therefore, the parts of the elements that are in man's body will be glorified by the reception of brightness when man is glorified. But it is fitting for whole and part to have the same disposition. Therefore, it's fitting that the elements themselves be endowed with brightness. Have the same disposition. That's again the lock and the key of which I was talking about. So, because of the change that happens to humanity in the resurrected state, the world is to be changed also in order to be in harmony with the state of man. And Aquinas will then argue that, and that's a quote from the compendium in chapter 170, down, yes, that the four elements are essential. Again, the difference between necessary in absolute sense, are necessary in an absolute sense for the human body. They have an essential ordination, he says, to the human body, and therefore those elements will remain, although changed to a better condition. Now, in this renewed world, when man is in the state of perfection, can the material world offer indications of God? Now, so here we have the idea of that's also in 170. More scroll down, please. Yes, thank you. In that passage. in the state of perfection, man is not brought to the knowledge of God by a consideration of sensible creatures. So Romans 1:20 applies no longer. Still, it is pleasing and enjoyable. So it's not necessary, but pleasing and enjoyable for one who knows the cause to observe how the likeness of the cause shines forth in the effects. That's a very interesting argument. I myself am a father, and so I try to understand this from my perspective, and then you can argue what is more perfect, to know the parents only, or to know also the children, in whom you can see the likeness of the parents. That's how I would rephrase it in a more modern context, or from my perspective. It is pleasing and enjoyable for one who knows the cause, the parents, to observe how the likeness of the cause shines forth in the effect. And so it is more fitting, enjoyable to see the divine goodness shining forth in material bodies. And of course, Aquinas is in particular thinking of heavenly bodies, because for him they have a certain kind of perfection that earthly bodies do not have. Another reason why, and then we scroll down to the last text. Another reason why the universe should continue in itself, where he says we can argue for the same conclusion by another way, from the nature of the universe. Man is a part of the material universe. The material universe should remain when man is brought to his final consummation. A part would seem to lack its proper perfection if it were to exist without the whole. So here you have this idea, a very unmodern. We think that we ourselves are so unique in the world. Everyone is unique. It is in a certain sense. Aquinas talks about an individual as being part of the whole. And so if the whole is lacking, the part is also missing something. A part would seem to lack its proper perfection if it were to exist without the whole. And then in that citation, he goes on to say that the material universe cannot remain in existence without its essential parts, and that will be the elements in the Aristotelian philosophy of nature of the time. So the completeness of the universe requires that not only man in his glorified state with the resurrected body exists, but also the world in which that individual existed when he was on earth as well. Okay, so I'll come now to my brief summary. So, though the body and the fellowship of friends can each conduce to the well-being, bene esse, of final human happiness, external goods are in no way necessary for perfect happiness. Yet, after the general resurrection, the bodily eye of the risen person will observe God in its corporeal effects. If you think about the for instance, at a very devotional level, the devotion for the human heart of Jesus. Aquinas is not saying that, but you can imagine that in the glorified state, the resurrected body will somehow still see the sacred heart of Jesus. Furthermore, man will have merited in such a way that this glory will be bestowed on the whole universe, insofar as this results in an increase of man's glory. Bodily creation will in the end be ordered to achieve a kind of radiance of glory. The elements will be changed to a better disposition. It will give joy to the saints to consider how the divine goodness reflects in bodily creatures. Since man is part of the material universe, the material universe must remain when man is brought to his final consummation, and the corporeal universe must remain in its essential parts. So man, the elements, and the heavenly bodies. So no animals or plants in heaven. That's sometimes a tragic message you have to bring to the children, but according to Aquinas, at least, no animals in heaven. There is a sharp denial of any contribution of external goods toward ultimate happiness. Human happiness cannot come through lower things. Man cannot attain or enjoy his ultimate end through material creatures. But the reverse is true, according to Aquinas. Material creatures can attain their perfection with the creation of a new heaven and new earth. The material world reaches its end, a higher state, through man having reached its ultimate end. That's the anthropocentrism of Aquinas. It is because man reaches his ultimate end in the glorified, resurrected state, that the material universe, that it is fitting and enjoyable, that the material universe will also receive a higher state. Because the just have been raised and glorified, creation too shares in that renewal. The world participates in human happiness. That's, in the end, his argument. In some places, Thomas speaks of glory as a kind of overflowing from the soul to the body. So also we might say that Aquinas, in terms of a new heaven and a new earth, he suggests a kind of overflow from man in his perfect risen state to the material creation.